I enjoy reading poetry. I especially enjoy the poetry of Mary Oliver, if she's familiar to anyone. And Mary Oliver has a poem that is very brief, but I think it's very powerful. And its title is "So Every Day," and it goes like this. So every day I was surrounded by the beautiful crying forth of the ideas of God, one of which was you. That's it, just those two lines. So every day I was surrounded by the beautiful crying forth of the ideas of God, one of which was you. And at least for me, that poem, in a sense, encapsulates the meaning of today's gospel. Today we continue our reading and our reflection on Jesus' powerful words from the Sermon on the Mount. And as we saw last week, Jesus has just proclaimed the surprising news to many of his listeners who were poor, who were sick, who were searching, that they were among those most graciously blessed by God. I can't improve on Father Paul's words from last week's homily, so I'm just going to repeat a few of them. Father Paul said, Jesus looks out on this crowd and he says to them, "You who are poor, you who are hungry, you who are mourning, you who are searching for peace, you are blessed because you are godlike. You resemble God in your poverty, in your weakness, in your lowliness, because that is how God came among us in the incarnation at Christmas." And now this week, Jesus builds upon this very foundational truth. He addresses his audience very directly. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And so in this way, Jesus is moving from announcing these blessings to giving instructions to those who were there and to us today about how we are to live. But I think it's important to remember that every one of those instructions, the ones we hear this morning and the ones we will hear in the weeks ahead as we hear the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, are built on this first foundation of blessing. Jesus doesn't say, "You're sinful, leave behind your sinfulness and transform yourselves into salt and light." He doesn't say that. Rather, he says, "You are salt and light. God made you to bless the world. You may feel small and insignificant, but like a pinch of salt or a spark of light, you are going to make a tremendous difference." And I think all of us know, just from a common sense perspective, that even small quantities of salt and light can make a big difference to the larger whole. For the cooks out there, you know that a pinch of salt brings out a dish's flavors. Even sweet things, if you're making cookies or brownies or something like that, you add salt because that brings out the sweetness, that brings out the taste of the chocolate or whatever the other flavorings might be. And even a little bit of light, even a single candle, can light up a room. And a single candle is visible from more than a mile away, 1.6 miles if you want to look it up on the internet. So both salt and light are very powerful, and they also have these very simple elemental purposes almost. So salt, as the gospel reminds us, is for saltiness. So if it loses its taste, there's nothing that we can do with it except throw it away. And likewise, light is for shining. The gospel tells us we don't light something and then put a basket over the top of it and cover it up. No, that wouldn't make any sense. And so in the same way, our identity and our purpose, who we are and what we are meant to do, are virtually one and the same, like salt and light. God made us a small thing that can make a big difference for a larger whole. God made us into something that can enliven the world, and God made us to shine as only each one of us can in our own particular way. And in that shining, we can help a person in need, we can talk to a weary traveler, we can help somebody who is in mourning. So Jesus isn't giving his listeners any kind of new role to play here. He's telling us who we already are. We don't have to work to become salt and light. God made us this way, blessing us with the gifts that can bless the world. But we do have to embrace and claim these gifts and live out these gifts. We do actually have to be salty and luminous, fulfilling and embodying our gifts. We have to be who we are. There's a story I love that's told by Robert Fulghum. He's a Unitarian minister. You may know him. He wrote a very famous book, Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And he tells this story in another book. He was at a seminar once at a conference in Greece, and on the last day of the conference, the speaker walked over to the bright light of an open window and looked out. And then he asked if there were any questions. And Fulghum laughingly asked him, "Yes, what is the meaning of life?" Now, when he asked that question, everybody kind of laughed and started stirring and got ready to leave. But surprisingly, the leader put up his hand and said, "No, I'm going to answer your question." And then Fulghum tells the story, the man took out his wallet, and out of his pocket of that, he took out a small round mirror that was about the size of a quarter. And then the speaker explained, when I was a young child, I found this broken piece of mirror, and I tried to put it all together and make it fit together again, but I couldn't do that. So he kept the largest piece. And then, taking that large piece of mirror, he scratched it on a stone so he wouldn't get cut by it, and he began to make it round. And as a child, he began to play with the mirror, trying to reflect light into dark places. And if you've ever seen children play with a mirror, that's the kind of thing that they would do with that. And he became fascinated with it as a child. Where were the deepest, darkest places he could reflect the light of the sun or reflect the light of the room into a closet or under a porch or something like that? But as he grew into adulthood, he kept the mirror, and he began to understand that this was a metaphor of what he could do with his life. He came to understand that he could reflect light into the dark places of this world, into the dark places of human hearts, and change some things in the world, and change some people. And he thought that perhaps others would see it as well. And he said, that is the meaning of my life. So for us, you might be able to guess, I had the same thought. Certainly we know there are dark, dark places in our world. We know the names of some of those places, places across the seas, places like Myanmar, that is so connected to our parish, places like Afghanistan, places like Ukraine. But we don't have to go across the oceans to find those kinds of places. Places like Memphis, places like Monterey Park, places like our own city, which has its share of violence and hatred. And we know some of the names of the individuals who have faced this darkness. Some of them very famous, like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and just in this last week, Tyree Nichols. But we know there are many, many others who we do not know their name, who've been touched by their darkness. And so I think each one of us has to reflect on what opportunities do I have to reflect light into dark places? What dark places do I encounter that needs the light of Christ? Is it poverty? Then be a light that addresses poverty. Is it ignorance? Then be a light that brings education. Is it racism? Then bring a light that is an ally and speaks out against the injustice of our brothers and sisters. And we could go on and on. As salt and light, we have to pray and act. And when people see this love in action, when they see the church in action, they can know that the limitless love of God exists. Because every day we are surrounded by the beautiful crying forth of the ideas of God. And one of them is you.